Good evening and welcome to this Zoom Candidates Forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties, and a special welcome to our candidates tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sandy Eads. I live in Kansas City, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters. The League and the Right for Women to Vote are celebrating our first 100 years this year, and I'm pleased to say both are still very relevant and important as we embark on our next 100 years. The League of Women Voters are organized at the local, state, and national levels, and our membership is open to all people of voting age, including men, since 1974. There are over 700 member leagues representing 500,000 members and active supporters, serving millions of voters in every election cycle. We're a nonpartisan organization, and we do not endorse candidates. But we are issue-oriented, and after careful study of an issue and when consensus for our members on the issue is reached, we advocate at all levels of government for our positions. The League is well known for voter services activities such as this one, taking part in voter registration, as well as candidate debates and forums, while bringing focus to the issues. Our popular site, vote411.org, will give you information about your particular ballot, candidates, ballot issues, and more. As you will know, we're going high-tech this year, live streaming this Zoom webinar on Facebook. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to the candidates for being responsive to voters. And our thanks to League member Elizabeth Darr for moderating tonight's forum. We also want to thank members of the League's Forums Committee for planning and organizing this event. Because of the nonpartisan nature of our forums, campaign literature cannot be displayed in any way until the conclusion of the event. As you can imagine, that's different when we're doing this live. We welcome and appreciate the participation of these candidates. To minimize distraction, we may turn off participant audio and video so we can concentrate on the District 25 and District 36 candidates. Our timekeeper and committee chair is Anitra Steele. If you hear a tiny bell ringing, it means the candidate has gone over his or her 90 seconds, and she may or may not be muted. The idea is to answer as many questions as we can get to. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Elizabeth now. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Sandy. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so pleased that you could join us. We have 6 candidates who are running, and we're delighted to have 5 of us joining us here this evening. I should point out that I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters, but I don't live in any of your districts. So the way we're going to work things tonight is, Anitra, can you ring your bell for us so we'll all hear it?
Did you hear it?
No. Can you hear it? Do it again. There we go. Okay. An enthusiastic whack on the bell. So if you hear that, you'll know that your time is up so you can complete your sentence, but we want to be able to get in a number of questions tonight, and we want to be fair to everybody. I'm going to ask you about 10 questions tonight. Generally, we go by a certain amount of time when we do this live, but we're finding it works better just to limit it to about 10 questions, and we'll try to be done around 7:30. Each of you will have 90 seconds to answer each question, and then 2 minutes at the end for your closing remarks. We ask that there won't be any rebuttals, but take some notes if you want to say something and answer somebody back in that last 2 minutes. I have a random distribution of order that might sound a little strange. We do this to be fair, but also to keep you on your toes. So the first question is going to go to Drew, and then we'll go, I'll tell you what the order is as we go along. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us your #1 priority? Oops, the first thing we have to do is unmute. There we go.
I knew I was going to fall into that trap at least once. I'm excited to kick this event off. My name is Drew Rogers. I am an attorney. I work at a local firm here in Kansas City. We do employment discrimination and class action work. I'm excited about the prospect of serving in the legislature on behalf of the 25th District, which is roughly the Waldo Brookside area. It also includes parts of the Plaza in South Kansas City as well. The number one priority that I would like to tackle is education. We can solve so many of our issues in society if we properly fund and train our students, and funding our teachers is important as an important component of that as well. I would like to serve on the education committees if given the opportunity, both primary and secondary education as well as higher education. I am, like I said, an attorney. I went to UMKC for law school. While I was there, I served as the student body president, which came with a seat at the faculty senate. And serving in the faculty senate gave me a window into how our higher education systems have to deal with budgets that are constantly in flux coming from Jefferson City, and how hard it is to deal with massive cuts that they've often received over the past several years. So with that experience, I hope to go into the legislature and advocate on behalf of our higher education institutions, particularly UMKC here locally, but all of them in general, because we need to do a much better job of providing access for our students and ensuring that we're not sending our students too far into debt and consequently pricing some folks out of education altogether. We also need to do a much better job at the K through 12 level, providing access and the tools that our districts need to succeed, particularly in programs like Start at Zero, which work with students and families as soon as they leave their hospitals where they're born, giving those families training and exactly what their students are going to need for kindergarten readiness.
Thank you. Patty?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting and for all of you joining tonight. Thank you. My name is Patty Lewis, and I am running for Missouri House District 25. I've been in healthcare for 20 years as an ICU nurse and as a healthcare executive. I've been advocating for people my entire professional career, from the most vulnerable patients in the hospital to the teams I've led. I'm an experienced leader who knows how to get things done, and I do not shy away from a challenge. I was born and raised here in Kansas City, Missouri, and I've been involved in community service my entire life. I decided to run for state representative because I'm extremely concerned with what is happening in our state. Poor legislation and policies in place are leaving folks behind. They're failing us. And I feel compelled to advocate for you and all Missourians and fight for a better future for us all. The number one issue I'm hearing from voters is healthcare, even prior to the pandemic. The one and only nurse we had serving in the House has actually termed out, and I find that very concerning, especially now. We need representation from folks who have real-world experiences with the issues we're facing.
Thank you. Nola?
Thank you. I'm Nola Wood, running for state representative for the 36th district in South Kansas City, and I so appreciate you all hosting this. I am very concerned about healthcare, education, and economic policies that impact our families and our communities. But as a grassroots activist in the city, I've sat through community meetings where elected representatives told us things that I knew were wrong. And sadly, many good, well-intentioned people have been misinformed by people we should have been able to trust. So I'm committed to push back against big government overreach and burdensome red tape that to promote common sense practices that will help us do what is right for our families and communities. I agree with Patty that one issue that impacts us all is healthcare. As an independent health insurance agent, I have seen, sadly, the good, bad, and ugly. And I'm a past president of the Greater Kansas City Association of Health Underwriters. I know that the healthcare issue plays into public safety, and frankly, in our community here in South Kansas City, we've seen good, productive members of our community decide to move away because of public safety issues. And so I believe there are things we can do to do better.
Thank you. Mark?
Hi, thank you for having me today. I'm State Representative Mark Sharp, and I'm seeking re-election for the 36th District in South Kansas City. I was elected in a special election last November. Before that, I was a teacher and coach for about 5 years. Before I got elected, I was teaching at KIPP KC, which is a public charter school in downtown Kansas City, real close to the 18th and Vine area, where I taught third grade ELA, English Language Arts. This past session, my biggest focus was crime and reducing the homicide rate and reducing the violent crimes here in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been traumatized myself from violent crime, having to bury my sister, who was a murder victim to domestic violence her senior year at MU, having to bury one of my best friends, who was a track star at UMKC, from gun violence. So this past session, one of the biggest focuses that I wanted to have was reducing the crime rate. So one of the biggest things that I'm proud of is being one of the only Democrats that had a gun sense bill moving and voted out of committee. And if you know anything about Missouri politics, Missouri legislature politics, if you have a bill voted out of committee before spring break, then you have a pretty good chance of having that bill crossing the finish line before May 15th. So that bill was Blair's Law, which would make it a state offense for celebratory gunfire. And I was able to present this bill in committee with another member of from across the aisle, showing bipartisanship support. And I believe that if the pandemic hadn't occurred, this bill would be signed and truly agreed to by the government. Going into this special session, I continue to try to work on reducing the violent crime, and I have high hopes that we'll pass the pretrial witness protection program to make folks feel more comfortable in this city to come forward and speak out against the very few and very small percentage of people that are responsible for so much violent crime in this city.
Thank you, Mark. Laura?
Hi there, thanks for having me. My name is Laura Loiacono, and I'm running for state representative in House District 36 in the Democratic primary, which is a week from yesterday. I'm running for the legislature because I'm concerned that while we know the legislature has long been hostile towards women's rights and issues that women care about, we've really reached a boiling point in the last 10 years. And I think that hyper-partisanship is robbing us of opportunities to address critical issues and issues that are important to us here in Kansas City, like access to healthcare, equitable education and appropriate funding for higher ed and K-12, and common sense gun laws. I have 30 years experience in public policy, including more than 13 years at the National Conference of State Legislatures, where I worked at the state, local, and national level on policy issues and with legislators around the country in a bipartisan setting. That led me to come to Kansas City 21 years ago, where I was recruited by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation to help work with the Missouri legislature on critical issues like early childhood education, transportation, and K-12 and education access. I spent the last 10 years in higher education working on improving STEM education in K-12 and in creating greater access for students in post-secondary education. I think my experience and leadership makes me a good candidate to represent Kansas City, and I hope to have your support on next week when we vote. Thanks.
Thank you. This next question is going to go first to Mark. Would you support legislative action to return control of Kansas City's police department to Kansas City?
Yes, I would. I fully support Mayor Quentin Lucas in getting local control back to the state government. And I said this a few days ago in another recent forum. Usually I'm a big fan of if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I think there's clearly something broken in the way we have things now. And a lot of folks are still trying to figure out what a local control system might look like. And I've been thinking about this a lot and which alternatives would best make sense for Kansas City. And I think one solution or one discussion that we could have is potentially a 6-person board or a 7-person board with a member or a board member from each council district That way that each section of the city has a voice on this board. And these people could be appointed by the mayor and then confirmed potentially by the city council. So that's something that I would look into and be supportive of. And maybe the mayor could appoint the chair, again, confirmed by the city council. So I think that's something that would benefit the city greatly. And I think that if law enforcement were to get on board with this idea and not fight it at every corner, I think that we could have some really good discussions on what the best solution could be like for having local control in the city. So I do support it.
Thank you. Nola?
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, please repeat the question.
I'm sorry. Would you support legislative action to return control of Kansas City's police department to Kansas City?
I think that's a very important issue, and the police officers that I'm acquainted with are happy with it being under state control. Sadly, we live in a city where unfortunately they have a hard time fixing potholes. And so I really don't want to see our public safety return to the control of City Hall. And I think a lot of people are in accord with that concern.
Thank you. Laura?
I absolutely support local control of the police department. I think that it is unjust and just doesn't make sense for the state to control our police department, especially when members have been appointed by the governor and Governor Greitens and our current governor, and they have demonstrated that they aren't willing to help us the way we need it. So I think that transparency and accountability to local voters for our police department is key. And we, local voters and taxpayers pay the bulk of the police protection, and so that they should be accountable to us, the local voters.
Thank you. Patty, do you support local control?
Yes, absolutely. I do support local control. You know, this dates back from the Pendergast years, and a lot has changed since then. We are the only city in the state that doesn't have control of our police department, but we need to do more. We need transparency, accountability. We need to provide our police with training and tools to be successful, like de-escalation training. And we got to go further even more with addressing our gun laws. You know, our state has some of the loosest gun laws in the country. I am a strong advocate for smart, sensible gun reform. As a nurse, I took care of so many patients who were victims of gun violence. And I am a proud volunteer with Moms Demand Action, and I will continue to advocate for smart, sensible gun reform in Jefferson City.
Thank you. Drew, what's your position on local control?
Local control is absolutely vital to achieving the meaningful reform that we need to see in our criminal justice system. And it doesn't stop with control of the police. We need criminal justice reform at all levels along the system. So achieving local control is great, and we'll have better accountability, like Laura was saying earlier, to the actual people who live in Kansas City. But that's only the case after the crime. So we need to get ahead of where people are actually committing crimes. So it does include gun sense legislation, like Patty mentioned. We need to be tackling these issues starting with education from the very beginning, so people have opportunity and aren't turning to crime. We also need reform in our criminal justice system with the public defender's office. We need reform with our prison system. We need to stop turning to prison, locking people up and throwing away the key as much as possible. So local control is the important first step and that first interaction point when people do commit crime. But we need to get both ahead of the issue, starting from education. We need to go beyond police control. It's clear that Kansas City has not a great relationship with our police department. And local control will go a long way towards smoothing that issue. I believe as an attorney, I have the skills necessary to commit to achieving these reforms at all levels of the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Our next question is, voting during a pandemic represents unique challenges. Do you support or oppose modernizing voting access through mail-in ballots, same-day registration, early voting, no excuse absentee voting, all measures safely and successfully employed in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Ohio, and other states? Drew, we're going to go back to you.
Well, as you just highlighted, these ways of increasing access to the ballot are working all over this country. We need to stop putting on blinders to what other states are doing and start learning from them. And voting is one area where other states have done enormous things, made major progress on voting rights and access to the ballot. In this current climate, it would be fantastic if we had already implemented these. Unfortunately, we are behind the times, and we need to, starting day one of the next session, address voting rights. We have one of the greatest voting rights organizations started right here in Kansas City by Jason Kander, Let America Vote. That organization pressed across the nation for voting access, and we need to do the work of bringing the measures that that organization was pushing for here to Missouri. So I am absolutely supportive of all of the issues you just mentioned. We need to particularly pay attention to voter registration. We need to make it much easier for folks to be registered and stay registered. And I think that there's some innovative ways to do that, working with our high school systems to make sure that our 18-year-olds are registered from the get-go.
Thank you. Patty? Do you want me to repeat?
Yes.
the question?
No. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I do support modernizing voting, same-day registration, early voting, no excuse voting. You know, like you said, many states are doing it safely and securely today. I'm tired of Missouri being the last state to adopt things. You know, it's about time we do this for every election, not just during a global pandemic. We must end voter suppression and eliminate gerrymandering.
Thank you. Laura?
Hi, this is probably the #1 issue that I've been hearing, especially in the last 2 weeks since people are under pressure to try and figure out the rather complicated rules for absentee voting, and also trying to figure out where their polling places are. I've talked to numerous people, particularly older people. My mother's 82. She lives in the district, and she's had to get some assistance with voting through her where she lives. But many other people are confused about what to do and whether they need to get something notarized. So it is far beyond time for Missouri to modernize. And I am hoping, and I want to be optimistic that this is one of those issues that we might be able to reach some bipartisan agreement on with rural legislators, suburban Republicans and Democrats, because I believe their constituents are really frustrated. And beyond that, they're scared to vote right now. They're afraid they're going to get sick, and they just don't understand the process. So it's terrible that it's going to take a global pandemic to make this issue be a top priority, but I do believe that the voters of Missouri will elevate this issue, and they'll be talking to their legislators, and hopefully we can get some movement here in the next legislative session to correct what's clearly an unjust voting system that's built to suppress the vote and just be completely confusing and inefficient. So yes, I wholeheartedly support all of those efforts and hope that we can tackle that next legislative session.
Thank you. Nola? Nola, you need to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I've clicked it, but clicked it wrong. I do find a lot of people are not aware of the modifications that were made to the law even this year. And so I've been sharing it a lot on social media, and I would challenge my fellow candidates to do the same. The Kansas City Election Board has it all spelled out very clearly on the website, which of course is all in the jurisdiction that both of these campaigns are running in. There are numerous accommodations that are available for those that want to go and vote early. And on the flip side, the cases where there have been abuse of absentee voting and mail-in voting, there have been a couple of cases in particular right here in Missouri where there were cases so egregious that they were taken into court. And for example, in St. Louis a few years ago, an establishment Democrat primary by a non-establishment Democrat, the court threw out the results due to illegal absentee, and the non-establishment person ended up winning.
Thank you. Mark?
Yes, I wholeheartedly support those measures, but I do want to go back to what Nola said. I do agree with her that a lot of folks just didn't know about the changes. And when we left session in May 15th, my office and my campaign did our best job to get the word out that there had been some restrictions that were loosened as far as the absentee and mail-in ballots. So we send out a weekly report from the House, my capital report that goes out to about 5,000 plus people here in the district. And we laid out exactly what those measures were and what those changes were for the mail-in ballot. So that's something that my office took a huge amount of time to focus on and make sure that word got out to our constituents. I think the first thing that we need to do is when we return back for our regular session back in January, that we need to continue to extend the changes that we've made for the August and for the November elections. So I think that's the first thing that we need to do. The other pieces are obviously pieces that I want to see happen as well. But like I believe Patty said earlier, Missouri's historically one of the last states to do some of these progressive things. And I think it takes strong relationships with the Republican leadership as it stands right now. And this is one of the main reasons why I'm seeking re-election. I think that I did a pretty good job last year of establishing very solid relationships and very good working relationships with Republican leadership last year, which is one of the reasons why I was able to have a gun sense bill moving in committee, and also why I was able to have an amendment passed on the House floor with no opposition in the last week of the legislature last year. So I think those are some things that we can do, and I think it's appropriate for us to be optimistic that we can extend those changes.
Thank you. Next question is, in our upcoming vote on August 4th, we will be voting on Medicaid expansion with Amendment 2. Are you in support of expanding Medicaid? And if so, how can Missouri pay for it during this time of reduced tax income? Mark?
Well, it's going to be challenging to find different ways to make up for that, for what we've lost during this pandemic. But the good news is expanding Medicaid is a 9-to-1 federal match. So most of these dollars will be coming from the federal government. Expanding Medicaid has been something I've been on board with, and I've put it all over my campaign literature, even back before when I was running for the special election in 2019. So it's something that I've been a huge supporter of from the very beginning. I signed the original petition to put it on the ballot, and I look forward to seeing it pass August 4th.
Thank you. Laura, how do you feel about paying for expanding Medicaid?
I fully support expanding Medicaid and plan to vote yes, and encourage everybody out there to vote yes as well. It's unfortunate that this had to come to a vote of the people. This is another one of those common sense issues that I wish the Missouri legislature had been able to deal with. It's a revenue generator, and it's something that's not only important to improve the health and health outcomes of our citizens, and to help address things like maternal and child mortality, particularly among women of color. And we have very poor health outcomes in the state of Missouri. So it's something we should have addressed a long time ago. That said, I'm glad it's on the ballot. And 37 other states have already expanded Medicaid. They have not found it to be cost prohibitive. In fact, it is more than made up for whatever they've had to lay out to get those federal dollars and to get that federal match. And so we're well suited here in Missouri to come out ahead on this one and improve health outcomes for our citizens. So again, fully support of expanded Medicaid and other measures that will expand access to health care and close those gaps for our citizens in Missouri.
Thank you. Nola?
Yes, I have a strong opinion on this because of my background in insurance. And sadly, this is one of the aspects of the, as I refer to it, the Unaffordable Care Act that really did harm to a lot of people. They already, because of the income guidelines for the tax credits and subsidies, it pushed actually a fourth of our population is already on Medicaid. Many of them didn't want to be on Medicaid. They wanted to keep their private health insurance, and just because of the rules and regs with that, they were not able to. What has happened then is that the people for whom Medicaid was intended, the disabled, the truly needy, have been stuck in line for the same caregivers, and even the claims that are being made widely in the advertising for expansion of Medicaid are just frankly wrong. And it's just so disturbing to me to hear these kinds of incorrect statements repeated over and over. It goes back to one of the issues with the ballot initiative petitions, and that's something else that we need to fix. But as a insurance professional, I believe that I am the voter's best choice to send this next time for these reasons.
Thank you. Patty?
Thank you. Yes, I 100% support Medicaid expansion, Amendment 2. I believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I believe all Missourians deserve access to affordable healthcare. As an ICU nurse, I took care of so many patients who were admitted to the hospital because they didn't have access to preventative healthcare services or could not afford their prescription medications. You know, as Laura said, 37 states have already passed Medicaid or expanded Medicaid. So I guess in this instance, we won't be dead last, we'll be number 38. Medicaid expansion will provide coverage to over 250,000 Missourians. It will keep our hospitals open, and it will bring our tax dollars back home. So I encourage everyone to vote yes on August 4th.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, I want to take a moment to kind of push back on how NOLA characterized this issue. And I think far fewer Missourians care about whether or not they have insurance or what their insurance is. More people want care. And I absolutely support Medicaid expansion for that reason, because it will provide access to care for over 200,000 Missourians who currently cannot afford or do not have access to it. You know, too many Missourians have actually died over the last several years since Medicaid expansion became an option because they could not afford to go to the hospital until the very last minute, and the outcome was already decided by that point. We need to make sure that we provide Missourians that access by expanding Medicaid Amendment 2 on Tuesday. And we need to go further than that. We need to make sure that every Missourian has access to care. Countries all over the world achieved universal health care, and it's a shame that this country has failed to learn from those systems and apply them here in the United States. But if we can't get the federal government to act on healthcare immediately, we need to do everything we can here in Missouri to do it. To pay for it, we can start by rolling back the tax experiment. So Sam Brownback in Kansas about 8 years ago decided to go down the rabbit hole of eliminating taxes for LLCs, most for businesses and also high-income individuals. Missourians saw the result of that, and our legislature plunged us into the exact same experiment with the exact same disastrous results. So we need to start by rolling back some of those tax cuts so that we can afford the 10%, but most importantly, we'll be bringing 90% of Missourians' tax dollars back and putting them to work for our healthcare here.
Thank you. Recently, new restrictions on abortion went into effect in Missouri. What parts of current Missouri abortion laws would you change or support, and why? And we'll start with Drew again.
I was actually in Jefferson City when the Missouri legislature passed HB 126 at the end of the session last year in 2019. And that was a very emotional day and a very shameful day in Missouri's history. I don't support the strenuous restrictions that we have on abortions here in Missouri. I don't believe that the government has any business in that decision. It is a very private decision that should be made between a woman and her doctor. The Supreme Court, in its decisions, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, laid out that women have a right to privacy on this issue. They have a right to choose what to do with their body. I look forward to making those strong arguments on the House floor and holding our legislature to task for violating what the Supreme Court has said on these issues and ensuring that women have continued access to safe abortions or access to reproductive care more generally. Unfortunately, Planned Parenthood is often caught in the crossfire of this issue. Planned Parenthood does so much more for Missouri women than just providing access for abortions. They provide care for those who are pregnant, and it is part of the reason why the maternal mortality rate is twice the national average here in Missouri and 3 times for women of color. Also, as Laura mentioned earlier, infant mortality is also higher than the national average, and we can do so much more for the people of Missouri by supporting Planned Parenthood and supporting women's access to privacy in that decision, whether or not to bring a child into the world.
Thank you. Patty?
Thank you. I am pro-choice, and I do not believe we should create more limitations for reproductive choices. As a nurse and a woman, I believe healthcare decisions should be up to the individual and their healthcare provider. They are personal, private decisions, not up to politicians. As state representative, I will fight and stand up for the right to choose in our state, and I will not back down. Because of my stance, I am the only candidate in this race to have been endorsed by Planned Parenthood, NARAL, pro-choice voters, and Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus.
Thank you. Mark?
I am pro-choice, and I am just saddened by the fact that we have politicians telling women what they can do with their bodies. Like I said before, my sister was a victim of domestic violence, and I can't imagine a situation to where she would have to go through something like that if she was still here. So I would do my best as I return back to session in January to have these not only hard conversations, but sometimes soft conversations, because a lot of times on the chamber floor, you don't get a whole lot done with the going back and forth, yelling at each other on the floor. So a lot of times you have to establish those relationships and have those conversations in a side gallery or somewhere else to try to find middle ground and try to sway their vote and try to get other members of the legislature to be on board. But I am willing to be creative and have those conversations with those people so we can try to undo this. Thank you.
Thank you. Nola?
Thank you. I am happy to report that I am the only candidate in my race endorsed by Missouri Right to Life Political Action, and I have actually worked in the pro-life community for some time. It was the issue that immediately propelled me to get involved in politics, because what I've learned is that everybody loses when innocent human life is not protected. The young woman is more likely to be abused sexually by a young man who might be tempted to abuse her. The men that we have talked with that sometimes have said, you know, a woman could have a bad day, she could be pregnant, they could be married, and the dad would have no say, as the laws are currently, to protect that human life or that woman from the later regrets that she might have. So the anti-life culture has seriously impacted everybody, and women are much more likely to be abused for the lack of protection of the human life that may be growing in her womb. And it does carry throughout life, because of course we've heard the sad stories, the tragic stories of people later in life, whether disabled or elderly, their lives were not protected because of this culture.
Thank you. Laura?
This issue is highly personal to me, and it's one of the keystone issues that propelled me to run for the legislature. Reproductive health is an essential right that we all have. And like Patty, I'm proud to be endorsed by the Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus, NARAL, and Planned Parenthood, and Pro-Choice PAC. I feel very strongly that I trust women to make the decision. The decision should not be made by men in the legislature who spend far too much time worrying about what's going on in women's bodies and not worrying enough about what's going to happen to children when they're born. That they're educated, they're fed, they're clothed, housed, and taken care of. And so again, reproductive health is healthcare. Healthcare is absolutely essential to all of us, and we need to trust women to make that decision on their own for what is best for them. I'm appalled that the Missouri legislature has continued to roll back in the last 10 years, but especially in the last session, which was the worst legislative session on record. We were nationally looked at in Missouri for our hostility towards women's rights and our refusal to protect women and to believe women when they stand up for their rights and access to reproductive freedom. So again, I feel very strongly about this issue, and I'm proud to lead on it. And I believe that the people of the 36th district in South Kansas City and in Missouri ultimately do support women and their right to choose and to make decisions about their own health care.
Thank you. The next question is this. What is your position on raising the fuel tax to fund badly needed road and bridge repairs and replacements? If not fuel taxes, what funding methods do you propose? Nola, we'll start with you.
Thank you. This is a difficult issue, and we do definitely need to look into it further. We have floated both approaches of toll roads versus fuel taxes, and we certainly need to take a much closer look at it. The problem always is which sector of the economy is going to pay, and which sector of the economy are we accidentally, unintentionally going to cause problems that then have ripple effects. Just as we've seen in the COVID shutdowns, there are ripple effects of whoever you decide to scapegoat on these issues. So we're going to have to take a careful look, and we're going to have to approach it very cautiously.
Thank you. Laura.
Good, keeping us on our toes. I like that. I think this is the gas tax is one of those issues that the Missouri legislature needs to look at. We've had some revenue in a time where we are, going to be desperate to help the economy recover after COVID, and that's got to be our first order of business, is to really tackle some of those revenue generating issues at hand that probably are common sense. Gas tax is one of those. I'm very concerned that there's going to be inevitable cutbacks in Kansas City to public transit. I think public transit's important in every single city across the country, but in Kansas City, it's essential, especially South Kansas City, where so many people are dependent on public transit. And so we have got to find a way to get that solved in Kansas City. People need to get to work and to grocery shop and to get to their appointments, and they're dependent on transit. So we need to figure out a way to get those dollars and get those revenues into the state. So I do support additional gas taxes. Missouri maintains more than, I think we're almost in the top 10 states in the country where our state highway department maintains more highway miles than almost any other state, but we do it for less. And so it is just time that we had more resources to the state highway so that we can maintain our roads and bridges and infrastructure and figure out a way to pay for public transit in Kansas City. It's essential to our economic future, and I think to our economic recovery as well.
Thank you. Mark?
Okay, so right now, all other surrounding states in Missouri have higher gas taxes, including diesel tax than Missouri does. Missouri has one of the lowest fuel taxes in the country. And we tried to do an overall fuel tax a while back, and that didn't work. So what I would suggest is, what would be the most easiest to pass would be, what I would suggest is a,
Oh dear.
so sorry about that.
Okay.
Am I still here? Okay.
Yes, you're here.
What I would suggest is having a diesel tax increase, a very moderate diesel tax increase, because right now we're in the middle of the country, and we have all these companies that are just simply passing through, and they're not paying their fair share. The amount of taxes that they're paying doesn't come close to the amount of damage that's happening to our highways and bridges. So I would think that a moderate increase in the diesel tax would be something that I'd be fully supportive of. And I think that that's something that we could try to sway members of the legislature to be on board with in Jeff City.
Thank you. Patty.
Thank you. So Missouri's transportation system is the 7th largest highway system in the nation, yet it ranks 48th in revenue per mile. Our crumbling infrastructure and bridges are dangerous. You know, and our fuel tax is one of the lowest in the country, and I do think we need to increase it. This time around, though, we need clear messaging to the community that an increase in what the increase will do to our infrastructure and bridges.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, along with most of the candidates, I think I'm hearing agreement. We need to do something about the gas tax, as Patty mentioned. 7th and 48th, those things are totally out of balance. So we absolutely need to raise the gas tax. It's important to do so because it also allows the state to capture the externalities that combustible engines cause. So we need to see a gas tax increase. We need to see it in the realm of 5 to 10 cents at the very minimum. And that is still putting us on par or lower still than our surrounding communities. In addition to a gas tax raise, we need to make sure that people understand how we fund our roads and bridges here in Missouri. It is solely through use taxes. So the gas tax is the only thing that pays for them. So a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. And when they do talk about, and I hear it a lot, especially here in Waldo, that we have crumbling roads, and the best way that we can combat that is to raise the gas tax. We also need to ensure that we have other funding mechanisms to ensure that we have plenty of use taxes in place. So tolls are one option. I'm not necessarily a big fan of toll roads. We definitely need to look into a mileage tax. That is something that other states are using to make up for the fact that cars are more fuel efficient and some cars don't use fuel at all, but they still use our roads. So that's one way we can address that situation. We also need more public transportation funding.
Thank you, Drew. The next question is this. There have been more than 110 shooting deaths in Kansas City in 2020. What solutions do you propose to decrease gun violence? Patty?
Thank you. Well, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we need smart, sensible gun reform. Our state has some of the loosest gun laws in the country. And like I said before, as an ICU nurse, I took care of many patients who were victims of gun violence. I saw firsthand the impact it has on victims and their families. This is a very personal issue for me. I'm a proud volunteer of Moms Demand Action. And last February, I went down to Jefferson City with mom volunteers from across the state advocating for smart, sensible gun reform. And that's something I will continue to do as state representative. And I'm proud to have received the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense Candidate distinction. So that's one way to address the crime and homicides. Another thing we need to do is we need to invest in services and address those most in need. We need to address poverty, mental health, physical health, education. You know, when I was working in the hospitals, I worked very closely with first responders and social workers, and we desperately need more social workers to help the community.
Thank you. Drew?
Yes. Gun sense legislation is very important, and I am a proud supporter and staunch advocate for gun sense legislation. That's background checks, that's red flag laws, and it's important that we have background checks on every single gun sale because, well, we have background checks, so people can say that, well, we already have that. No, we don't, because we don't have it on every single gun sale. We need to ensure that we have that. I've also received the gun sense distinction from Moms Demand Action. I'm very proud to have that distinction. I intend to work very hard on this issue. It's also important to note that we need to get ahead of this issue. Like I mentioned earlier, we have to ensure that our population is well educated, that it has access to health care. All of these issues work together to ensure that people live productive lives, aren't turning to crime as a means of survival. And I intend to do just that by working to give Missourians the tools they need to succeed on healthcare, on education, affordable housing, and better wages. So that's how I look forward to tackling that issue. I went and shadowed Greg Razor actually when I was taking the bar exam in it was spring of 2018. And I called Greg up, the current state representative for this area, and I asked him, what is there to do on a Tuesday night in Jeff City? And he said, well, my gun bill is in front of the committee. And so I said, well, great, let's go here. Let's go see that. And it was a shame to see the General Laws Committee water down his bill, and then vote down his bill. And I look forward to going into the legislature, fighting hard on behalf of gun sense legislation, and hopefully working across the aisle to achieve some gun sense laws here in Missouri.
Thank you. Mark?
This is probably the most personal issue for me and my number one focus as I return back to Jefferson City, especially for our special session. I was with the mayor and tons of other elected officials calling for the governor to have a special session on crime. I think there's a few of us on here that are the Moms Demand Action recognized gun sense candidates, and I had that distinction as well. I'm very proud to have that. Last year, I was very successful in bringing my Blair's Law bill, House Bill 2169, to General Laws Committee with Representative Dean Plocker at the chair. Me and him had tons of offline conversations about the bill. He loved the bill. Me and two other representatives presented this bill in General Laws Committee. And again, this is to make celebratory gunfire a state offense. Right now, it's only a city ordinance, basically a slap on the wrist for shooting your gun in the air. And if you know South Kansas City at all, you know that on certain nights like 4th of July and New Year's Eve, or if the Royals or Chiefs win a Super Bowl or World Series, people are up all night shooting their guns. And it may seem like fun. I know it's in good spirit, but people get killed doing this. And a little girl was killed in 2011 at about 8:30 at nighttime on 4th of July. It wasn't like it was midnight or 1 o'clock. It was in the middle of the evening. So I had this bill passed out of General Laws Committee 12-1. The version it went with was my version. It was a very clean, straightforward bill. I know down there, this was my first year, but I recognized very quickly, the cleaner your bill is, the better chance it has of passing. So I was very happy they went with my version. Unfortunately, the pandemic happened right after that bill was passed out of committee in early March, and it wasn't able to move forward after that. This bill has been introduced several times, even going back to when then Representative Gene Peters Baker had introduced this bill that long ago. But I think we're getting closer and closer every time. And I think with the momentum that I made last year, we'll be able to get this bill passed. And this will give law enforcement the teeth to really enforce this law in South Kansas City. And this isn't intended to lock more people up. That's not my intention. The intention is to work with the communities, work with the churches and the school districts to make sure that, hey, the law has changed out here. Get our young folks to stop shooting in the air because we don't want them to go to jail. So I was very happy to introduce that, and I look forward to supporting the pretrial witness protection program and strengthening the penalties for witness and victim tampering. A lot of times in Jefferson City, the victims are forgotten about. The victims are so often forgotten about in Jeff City, and I want to be the voice for victims representing South Kansas City in the Missouri legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Well, quite simply, Missouri has the loosest gun laws in the entire country. I mean, arguably, and it's a core issue for many of us on the call. I was with Patty down with Moms Demand Action. It was great to see that many women down in the legislature and working through the process and advocating and telling their personal stories, and talking about the fact that in Missouri we have permitless carry, no background checks, no waiting periods, no red flag laws, and it's terrible. And the consequences are dire for us here in Kansas City, but across the state. I was talking with a gun shop owner the other day who expressed great concern at the number of people that are coming in to purchase handguns that he, in his words, have no business purchasing handguns. They didn't seem to have a grasp of the safety issues that were going to be necessary, of the training they're going to have to keep, how to load a gun, where to store a gun. He said he's particularly seen, you know, during COVID and a surge of guns with women. And he's just, and I share that concern. Like others in Moms Demand, I have no intention or desire to take people's guns from them, but we do have to get a handle on this. I am proud to be a gun sense candidate and to be one of 2 candidates in the state of Missouri who received an endorsement for Everytown for Gun Safety, and will fight vigorously for those laws and to find a way to, I don't know how we're going to find commonality with rural legislators who just see this issue differently. I think it's very important that we try and that we try to bring up some issues of commonality, but the repercussions for what's going on in Kansas City with our high homicide rate, especially in South Kansas City, just makes it an emergency that we deal with this issue and do it immediately.
Thank you. Nola.
Yes, I am very concerned, and I think it's important that we all acknowledge that public safety is job one of government at all levels. So if we can't keep our citizens safe, then we're not fulfilling job one. The reason that gun laws don't get passed in our legislature are that most people do realize that the only people who abide by gun laws are the law-abiding citizens. The criminals have ways of getting guns, and so all the gun laws in the world won't keep the criminals from getting the guns. So then the law-abiding citizen has no way of defending themselves when evil happens. Now, one thing that we certainly can do better is help with the mentally ill, the addicted. That is an area where the deaths, the homicides that have happened in our area were directly related to that. And there are areas around the country where there are assisted outpatient treatment programs for the mentally ill. So you don't have the revolving door of someone who truly has mental health and addiction problems and they're perpetrating crime. I believe we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question. Do you support or oppose employment protections for LGBTQ Missourians? We'll start with Laura.
I absolutely support protections. They're fundamental human rights. Missouri has a terrible track record, and as does our legislature, for support of LGBTQ citizens. And it, again, another one of those areas where Missouri tends to make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Our legislature has had the chance to adopt protections and to look into issues like better education in local school districts with anti-bullying, or for comprehensive education that includes information about LGBTQ students, protection for our student athletes, and allowing them to participate in sports at the local level. So I think that my record is clear. I'm absolutely support of those rights as a fundamental human rights, and will continue to champion and fight for those rights. Also to support local communities like Kansas City that have enacted ordinances to anti-discrimination ordinances, which the state does not like to support, but I will continue to support and fight for those if elected, and take up the mantle down in Jefferson City.
Thank you. Mark?
I, again, wholeheartedly support this passing Mona, the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act. I've stood with Representatives Ashley Bland Manlove and Representatives Greg Razor in supporting and passing this this bill. You know, it's just a shame. And I know this is a bipartisan group, but it's just embarrassing that we're still having to try to pass common sense bills like this that I'm not sure if the Missouri legislature is in competition with states like Mississippi in being last on almost every progressive issue known to man. But this is one of those issues that's very, very important to me. And I want to do my best to, again, have some of those hard and soft conversations with Republicans to make sure that we can try to get this passed.
Thank you. Nola?
Yes, thank you. This is again an area that maybe people are unaware that this U.S. Supreme Court recently prohibited quote unquote discrimination on the basis of these issues. And so passing a state law really would be a moot point at this time. The problem, of course, is in compelling people, let's say the funeral home in another state that was compelled, that they were sued for wanting to not have someone cross-dressing ministering to their grieving families. There are issues and there are times to have conversations along these lines, and there are settings where it just is wrong. And so the bottom line is it shouldn't be anybody's business what someone's doing in their bedroom. The whole idea of bringing it out and making it a big issue for a very tiny percentage of the population has become a Democrat-Republican issue, and I'm sad about that. I wish that we could abstain from worrying about these issues that are so minor when we have such huge problems in the area of public safety, education, the economy. Let's get real and talk about the real issues.
Thank you. Patty?
Thank you. Yes, I do support Mona and fighting against discrimination. And I want to provide some clarification. While the Supreme Court was a victory, it didn't cover everything. It is still legal in Missouri to discriminate against someone based on their sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation when it comes to housing and public accommodations. And this is unacceptable to me. You know, equal rights has been a top priority for me, and I look forward to putting my name on Mona next year, and I won't stop until we get it passed.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, I also want to talk a little bit about the Bostic decision, which was recently handled down. And if you'd like, you can run over to my Facebook page. Me and my wife sat down for about an hour and discussed the Bostic case, which was a very important win at the federal level, but again, does not make it a moot point here in Missouri. And I think we very well could take this issue off the table if we could just agree not to discriminate against folks. And it's important that we pass Mona to protect folks in their employment and their housing discrimination. It's important that people can do what they want in their own bedroom, but it's also important that people can live their life exactly as who they are. And so we could take this issue off the table very quickly by passing Mona. We could get to those really important issues, but unfortunately, Republicans just haven't decided that they're willing to do that yet. And I've had conversations with Representative Razor on this issue, and he's told me that he's made great inroads with a lot of legislators in Jeff City. And they say, Greg, I'm with you. I think you deserve protections in your employment and in your housing, but if you just drop transgenders, I could get behind the bill. And we're not going to allow discrimination against one group of people. We're going to ensure that everyone has protections because everyone has dignity.
Thank you. We do like to have questions from the audience, so I'll read this question from our audience. Women have been less than 25% of the state legislature in Missouri. What is the history of women serving in your district? Do you think representation matters for women? And Drew, we'll start with you.
Yes, I believe that representation does matter. And the history of women serving in my district is a fairly decent one, although the numbers, again, are stark, only 25% of the current legislature. But in the past, Marcia Campbell has served this district with great success. Claire McCaskill served in this district in the Missouri House of Representatives. So there is a tradition of women serving in this seat. And I think we need to do everything we can to elect women across the state. I personally believe I'm the best candidate in this race due to my background with a variety of issues and my training and experience with the law. However, that does not mean that we do not need to elect women all over the state. And I believe that there are many races that are going to elect women this year, and I'm excited to work with them in the legislature.
Thank you. Patty?
Yes, I do believe representation matters. We do need more women elected. My district does have a long line of strong women who have represented, from Claire McCaskill to Janae Lowe, Jean Peters Baker, Beth Lowe Smith. But we haven't had a woman representing this district since Janae Lowe. It's been years. So it's time that we have better representation in this district and across the state, get more women elected. You know, I'm talking to voters every single day, and they're so excited to have a woman on the ballot, finally, after so many elections. And I'm pleased to share with you that I have been endorsed by Janae Lowe and Beth Lowe Smith, who previously held this seat.
Thank you. Laura?
Yes, I think our representation is key. We haven't had a woman represent this district, been elected to represent this district since 2006, and that is just far too long. And unfortunately, I think our policies in the state legislature and the behavior of elected officials really reflects that. This seat became open last year when the member who served had to leave for sexually harassing and then subsequently firing a member of the staff. And so that's one of the reasons that I think our voices need to be heard. We're 51% of the population and less than 25% of the legislature. And as I said before, there are members who work hard to squelch the voices of women, and I look forward to being elected so that I can raise up those voices and make our concerns heard. I frankly think that women are just care about a lot of issues and are effective in advocating for issues like public education, like early childhood education and mental health. And I think many men do an excellent job at talking about those issues, but for women it's personal, and I think their leadership and their voices absolutely must be heard. And I think it's to our detriment as a state and to a community to not have those voices adequately represented. So I'll wrap up by, again, saying yes, I think women's voices must be heard, and it's absolutely critical that we elect more women to the state legislature and to all levels of government. And I'm, again, a proud member and board member of the Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus. That's our fundamental role, from hoping that the ERA would pass, which it still hasn't passed, but electing women is critical. And I hope that I am elected next week.
Thank you. Nola?
Yes, thank you. I generally oppose quotas. I believe that we should always, in any election, in any job hiring, we should always hire the person who's the best qualified for that job. Personally, I think it will be historic if I am elected this year as in the centennial of the women getting the vote. It is also, of course, we always want the person who's most qualified. And I have the background with having been in small business, having been in insurance, having raised 3 children, and the issues that we've talked about here today. The concerns, there's so many concerns that we as women and moms bring to the table. The special place in our heart for the importance of education, of getting it right, of giving parents freedom to choose their educational choices for their families. There are many issues that we as women do bring to the table that I believe it will be a historic win for me to win this seat this year.
Mark?
Yes, I believe the last woman to hold this seat, I believe was Kathy Jolly. I think that was in 2006, in the early 2000s. But it's extremely important to have women representation, especially in Jefferson City. As it was mentioned before, you have so many politicians who are attacking women's rights at every turn. But as a state representative in a very diverse district stretching from state line and some of the nice neighborhoods from Verona Hills all the way stretching across back to Ruskin Heights and Hickman Mills area. It's a very diverse district. And I think that this district deserves to have a representative that knows the area, that's been around. I've lived most of my entire life in South Kansas City. Grew up in the Hickman Mills School District, and I know what South Kansas City has gone through. South Kansas City is always last to get everything. And part of my job is to make sure and ensure that South Kansas City is being kept in the conversations. But before we can return to where we were and bustling and with economic development in the 90s, we have to do a few things first. We have to reduce the crime, and we got to get the Hickman Mills School District back fully accredited. It's my job to work with groups like Moms Demand Action and getting their support and trying to represent them and be a voice for them as well in committees and on the floor. And if I'm elected again, I will do just that.
Thank you. There are a number of other questions that I could ask you, but surely there's a question that you wish I had asked. So for our final question, what question do you wish I had asked, and what's your answer? And we'll start with Laura.
But one of the issues that's important to me and a cornerstone of my candidacy is support for public education. I am a product of a public school teacher. I went to public schools, and since moving to Kansas City and living and working and advocating in Kansas City for 21 years, I put my own children through the Kansas City, Missouri public school system, where I was an active parent and actively engaged. I still serve on the Education Foundation for the Kansas City Public Schools, and I think that they are not only woefully underfunded, but there's major problems of inequity in Missouri's approach to public education. And I think that the Missouri legislature has had a long history of chipping away at supports for and supports not only just financing, but in the way they approach public education. And I think that in my district, in House District 36, there are 3 school districts in Hickman Mills, Center, and Grandview school districts. And all of them are wanting for resources, but they're also really struggling with issues that are beyond their control, like gun violence, like unstable housing conditions. And those issues permeate what's going on in the schools. The Hickman Mills School District has been unaccredited, but there are some major equity issues. The students that attend those schools their parents are having to deal with issues like unstable housing conditions, and through no fault of those students, no fault of their own, they're falling behind when they have to keep changing schools simply because their parents don't have stable housing conditions. And I think that there's many things that the State Board of Education and that the legislature can do to help close the inequities and help to address the inequities between suburban and urban school districts. And hopefully we can find some commonality across the state, though it has been proven to be difficult as they continue to chip away and examine issues like vouchers or expansion of charter schools that are going to really serve to harm our school districts. And so if elected, that is going to be one of the major things that I want to work on. And I have a lot of experience in working in college access in our school districts and in working for our students to pave the way for them to have better opportunities and to help those families find a way to pay for post-secondary training, whether that's job training or earning a 4-year degree. And it's very important to me, and I hope to be, and I will continue to work on it regardless of wherever I'm elected. It's a very personal and dear issue to me, and I think it's important. Thanks.
Thank you. Mark?
Okay, so a two-part deal since you're giving me a chance here. The first question I would have liked to have heard was, when I was down there this past session, one of the biggest issues was expanding charter schools. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. And then the second is the foundation formula for education here in the state. For public charter schools, even though I worked at a public charter school for the last 2 years before I was elected in November of 2019, my heart is with the Hickman Mills School District. I went to Hickman Mills. I graduated through the elementary, middle school, and high school. So did my sister, my late sister. So trying to protect and make sure that our school districts, especially Hickman Mills, are safe. And I don't want to have or see a situation to where we have charter schools that are expanded into our district. And now we're seeing some of our best and brightest students and most engaging families being siphoned off from a school district that's really struggling to keep all of its best students. So I would hate to see a situation to where we see a charter school meaning well actually hurting one of our public schools. And the Hickman Mills School District has already been hurt enough. My own school doesn't even exist anymore because we've had to reduce it so much. Now we're down to just one high school. And people in South Kansas City don't like that. And we don't like to see our school district that we've fallen so in love with go down this route. So seeing that change and protecting the Hickman Mills School District and other school districts in the area, like Center and Grandview, are extremely important for me. As far as the foundation formula is concerned, people say that it's fully funded, but it really isn't. The goalpost has been shifted, so to speak, and it's not as fully funded as it ought to be. For two, it's unfair to urban and suburban school districts. We have a lot of students who are English language learners who don't get a high enough percentage in the school in the foundation formula for funding. And we don't have a high enough percentage for the students on free and reduced lunch who don't get enough resources in that foundation formula. So those are things that I would hope that I can advocate for, hoping that next year I can fill the void on the education committee, having losing Judy Morgan to term limits. I would love to be that voice, not only for crime and for victims, but also for more funding for education. Last year, I did sponsor a bill. We do have a ton of families.
Mark, I think that was your time. Sorry. You got your final thing coming up. Get ready. Nola.
Yes, thank you. One issue we haven't touched at all is the issue, speaking of stability and people in their housing, the home ownership and small business ownerships that have been impacted by the Jackson County tax assessment fiasco. I have attended a hearing that the legislature did last year, and there were members of our community that were saying they felt like the county was trying to steal their property from them. Now, as a former real estate independent small business person who, in that era when many of us lost everything we'd worked for because of poorly thought out public policy, this is an area that I would like to bring the experience and the knowledge that I have of real estate and tax assessment to make sure that we have laws at the state level that would prevent Jackson County from basically causing potentially a glut of foreclosures or of even properties being placed on the market because the people had their taxes raised so high so suddenly that they couldn't possibly hope to pay those taxes. There are other areas that impact the economics of families.
Thank you. Patty?
Thank you. The question I wish you would have asked me is about transparency and dark money, which we all know is a huge problem with campaigns and politics. I believe so strongly about transparency and eliminating dark money that as a candidate, I have itemized and disclosed every contribution, whether it's a $1 contribution or a maximum contribution. I have made every attempt to be completely transparent with you when it comes to who's funding and supporting my campaign. Now, not all candidates take this same approach, and I encourage you all to look at all the candidates' MSC reports. Are they being fully transparent with you? Are they itemizing who's contributing to their campaign? And if they're not, why? The fact that I took time to share this information about who's supporting my campaign is what it will be like as your state representative. I will continue to be open and transparent with you. I will have routine town halls. I will provide weekly updates on what's happening in Jefferson City. I want to have an open door policy. Maybe not during COVID, but just a phone call away.
Thank you. Drew?
Thank you. I think the question that I wish you would have asked me was, what do you see as your role as a state representative, particularly a member of a super minority in Jefferson City? And I think there's a lot of agreement between my opponent and I on all the issues. We're very well aligned. But I think what the role of a Democrat in the Jefferson City, in the legislature for the state of Missouri, is to be there advocating for the people of Missouri at all times, in all rooms. So we need to take as much out of the political process as we possibly can. Issues like affordable housing, which I've written a bill on and look forward to achieving its passage when I'm out there. That's another issue or another role that I hope to play as a legislator. Being active in the lawmaking process, actually writing bills myself. That's very important that we have legislators active in the lawmaking process, because too often we're relying on special interests and on lobbyists to do the work for us, but I look forward to doing the work myself. The other role that we have to play is in the committee room, where we have to be quick on our feet. And that's why you won't hear prepackaged answers from me, is because I know that in the committee room, I'm going to have to be thinking on my feet and being quick to understand where lobbyists are trying to squeak in a nice little cookie for the special interests. And I think that's why Sly James has endorsed me in this primary, because he sees my ability to play that role in the committee room.
Thank you. Well, we thank you all for your very interesting and insightful answers to our questions. We've now come to the time for your 2-minute summaries and your big pitch. And following our random order, I'll start with Drew.
All right. I want to really thank the League of Women's Voters for putting this event on, to giving us the chance to speak directly to voters. It's been a very interesting year since, well, it feels like 5 years since March, and definitely changed the game in terms of actual voter outreach. So this is a really great opportunity. I'm in this race to help folks. I want to give Missourians the tools they need to succeed. I think those issues are healthcare, education, better wages, and more affordable housing. I have a variety of experiences with those issues, which I look forward to bringing to bear for the people of Missouri. Like I said, I wrote a bill on affordable housing, and I look forward to achieving its passage. I could spend a good part of an hour talking about it, so since I only have 2 minutes, I'm going to breeze past that one and ask you to go to my website, rogersforprogress.com. As I've stated earlier, I'm very passionate about education. We need to do everything we can to put our children in a position to succeed, to ensure that no child is at a disadvantage based on where they live, where they were born, or the house that they're raised in. We need to protect our unions here in Missouri. It's been a long time coming for the people of Missouri, with income inequality continuing to rise. And that is because we have attacked unions over the past 40 years, and we have limited the ability for people to collectively bargain and to collectively negotiate with their employers. So we need to protect that here in Missouri. And healthcare is very important too. We need to vote yes on Amendment 2. We need to achieve healthcare for every single Missourian. It's really important in these very uncertain times that we have people with training in the Constitution. As I've mentioned before, I'm an attorney. I look forward to bringing my experience with the lawmaking process to bear for the people of Missouri. I want to use my training on the Constitution to ensure that when we inevitably elect a new president in November, that we're doing our best here in the state level and at the local level to ensure that we bring some normalcy back to the United States and to Missouri. And I look forward to doing that. I was born in this district at St. Joseph's Hospital. I have been a resident of Waldo since 2012. I look forward to being a lifelong resident of Waldo. It's been an honor of a lifetime to run. It would be an honor of a lifetime to serve this community as a state representative.
Thank you. Patty?
Once again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum and for all of you joining this evening. Because we're in a global pandemic and the recovery will be very challenging, we need experienced leaders who are ready to hit the ground running on day number one. I don't just talk the talk, but I've walked the walk. As an ICU nurse, I was in the trenches. As an executive, I led teams and managed folks and fought for things that we all care about. I have years of experience working with people where we don't always see eye to eye. And I was able to find common ground to get things done. I have devoted a lifetime to community service, and I will continue my commitment to service by representing you in Jefferson City. Last summer, I started knocking on doors, and now I continue to call voters every day. Although our world has completely changed, the concerns remain the same. Families are concerned about healthcare, gun violence, education, the economy. You know, I've talked to several folks who said, you're the only candidate who's reached out to me. And I'm reaching out because I want to listen and learn what matters to you. That will help me represent you best in Jefferson City. Now, to find out more information about me and where I stand on the issues, please visit my website, patty4mo.com. That's pattyformo.com. I have my personal cell phone and contact information listed there as well. I want to hear from you. I want to be accessible as a candidate and as your state rep. It would be my honor to advocate and serve you in Jefferson City, and I hope I can earn your vote on August 4th. Please remember, Patty Lewis, State Representative, District 25.
Thank you. Mark?
Okay, thank you. I'll go back real quick to what I was saying earlier. Some bills that I sponsored last year, and the reason why I'm seeking re-election for House District 36 is I believe I'm the right person to have in this district. It's a very diverse district. It's a very tricky and treacherous situation to navigate in Jeff City with the politics and having to find ways to get your language on bills, whether it's in committee or whether it's on the floor. Last year, I made great relationships with Republican leadership, and let's be honest, the Republicans are going to be in charge down there for a while until we start flipping seats, and that's fine. But we have to find ways to have relationships, and I think that I've done that. I had a bill that was sponsored and voted out of committee. That was a common sense gun bill. I had a bill that was going to make it easier for students that are in transient families and transient homes to have easier access to the A+ Schools program, which gives scholarships to seniors who are going to community colleges. And right now, the current way it is if you're not at the school for 2 years, the same school for 2 years, then you can't qualify for it. So I'm trying to change it to 1 year, which would give those students who are in those transient homes an easier chance to have access to those scholarship funds. Last year, I fought to keep fewer guns out of the schools. When Republicans tried to make it a mandate that school protection officers have a gun or a pepper spray device on them in every school across Missouri, I had amendments on the floor offered to make it and leave it in the school district's hands to not have that many guns in the schools. So many schools in urban and suburban areas already have school resource officers, so there's no need to have 2 people that have weapons in the school building. We need to reduce or change the education formula so we can have more funding for schools like Hickman Mills and Center. And I fully support the witness protection program so we can try to get folks to feel more comfortable with coming forward to try to get the few percentage of people that are responsible for such a high percentage of crime in this city off the streets. I'm from this area. I'm not afraid to knock on any door in any neighborhood in this area. I'm from this area and I know the people here, whether they knew me or knew my sister or my family. My heart bleeds South Kansas City, and I look forward to having your support August 4th. And I sure hope that folks vote yes on question 2 and on the zero tax increase for the Hickman Mills bond issue for capital improvements to all the Hickman Mills schools, because it is desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Hi there. Thanks. I joined the other candidates in thanking you for doing this. It's been really hard to get our voices heard for sure as candidates during time of COVID. So this is just absolutely essential so people can look at the candidates, look at our backgrounds, and then make a decision for themselves, which is really what democracy is all about. So thank you. I have 30 years of public policy experience. First at the National Conference of State Legislatures, where I worked with legislatures, including the Missouri legislature, all across the country. My 21 years here in Kansas City, working and living and contributing to community issues of importance, like public education, like college access, and economic development. And I believe that my experience and leadership will serve us well in Jefferson City and representing the people of South Kansas City. I understand the state legislative process. I'm willing to listen and learn from neighbors and enjoy talking with them and hearing about their concerns. And I will be out long after the election, listening to people and carrying their voices down to Jeff City. Again, I care deeply and passionately about our economic recovery. And I think, day one, when we get down to the legislature, we're going to have to set about figuring out how we are going to dig out of this hole and make sure that the recovery is equitable, that all sections of our state, from rural to urban, and all sections of this very diverse district have access to healthcare, have access to post-secondary education, and have access to job training and other supports that are going to be essential in having us recover after COVID. And most of all, I really want to be the voice for the people in Jefferson City, in a place that otherwise works so hard to squelch the voices of so many of us. So I hope you go to my website, Loyacono for Mo, that's Loyacono for Mo, to learn more about me. And I've been walking doors all over this community for months and months now, and hope to continue talking with people on the phone over the next week and in other ways to make sure that our voices are heard. Thanks so much. And again, vote yes on Amendment 2, and I hope you'll vote for me next Tuesday. Thanks.
Thank you. Nola?
Thank you. I join the others in thanking you all for the forum, and thank all of those who are listening and will listen in coming days to this recording. I will stand, as I have for years, for the individual personal freedoms, the education, the public safety, the small businesses, the individual's rights. And I have seen over the years that there are a lot of good, well-intentioned people who have been misinformed by people they should have been able to trust. And so I will push back against big government overreach and burdensome red tape to do what's right for our families and our community. I have raised 3 children. I have been an activist in my community, and frankly, people know me whether we agree on every topic. I have been building coalitions in South Kansas City and in the region for years, and I'm very grateful for lots of wonderful friends. We don't necessarily agree on everything, but we want to see our community thrive. I think that this is a year like none other, where people see the historic impact of every place on the ballot. It's not enough to just elect someone who the city political machine has pushed forward, but we need to make sure that the voters are aware of the issues involved and will support, will have the freedom to know who they can support that will support the values that we share. I look forward to serving our community, and regardless of whether I'm elected or not, I will continue to serve the community. But I believe that this is the year to turn it around. I believe that the people of Kansas City deserve real representation. And with the issue of the majority party, of my being part of the majority party, I can certainly do more for our community as a member of the majority party. So I invite everyone to take a look at electnola.com. My personal contact information is on there. I would be so pleased to hear from voters with questions through email or phone. And thank you so much.
Thank you all for being with us tonight. We certainly wish you all good luck, and we urge our audience to make your vote count on August 4th. For closing remarks, I'm going to turn it back over to Sandy Eads, our president.
Elizabeth, thank you. And to the candidates, a very wonderful rendition of your positions. This gives us what we really want in our forums. Thanks so much for joining us. The League's efforts are all about empowering voters and defending democracy. And this is how we do it. Before the election, take a look at your ballot, which you can find on the League's homepage at www.lwvkc.org, and go to Vote 411. You can see what your ballot is. You can make some decisions about candidates, and please vote on August 4th. Again, thanks to the candidates very much, and to all of you for joining us in empowering voters. Good night.